Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about something quite simple but quite foundational, and it's going to be about note taking. So here's something that I've noticed. So a lot of you guys have been asking me like, what's your favorite way of taking notes from books? What's your favorite note taking strategy or model, or should I take it physically or should I take it digitally? Should I put it in an ideas bank or should I use note cards? But today, let's wind all of that down and let's just talk about what note taking is for. Especially, I want to ground today's discussion in the recent developments in artificial intelligence because I think we cannot ignore this problem any longer. And I think we are, especially humanities people, we are in the business of re-articulating what's so special about taking notes for yourself, what's so special about thinking for yourself, and what's so special about not acquiring information by just typing in a prompt. Sometimes in some cases it's incredibly useful, but today I'm simply going to build a case for how and why you should take notes by yourself. And when I say take notes, I simply mean whenever you encounter an online article, whenever you read a book, you read a fiction book, or you read some nonfiction book on a topic that you enjoy, how do you take notes from these books and how do you ensure that these notes are going to be useful down the line? Because sometimes we tend to take notes that we never review ever again. So we're going to address all these problems and a potential solution in this video right here. So this is one of my favorite topics because I'm a note-taking fiend. And before we get into some of the intricacies of taking notes, here is a brief word for today's video sponsor, which is a company called Hungry Minds. So you might have seen this giant book floating around the internet recently, and they were very generous to send me a copy. And I think as a lifelong student, this is one of the perfect gifts, especially with a fast approaching holiday season coming up. If you have a bookworm friend, a nephew, a niece, maybe one of your kids, they love science or invention, this book is sort of pitched as the ultimate guide to rebuilding civilization. So what do they mean by rebuilding civilization? So let's just say civilization gets wiped out. We're starting from the very beginning. What are the building blocks that we need to rebuild it? How do we start a fire? What sort of components do we need to regather food, to restart agriculture? So what are the building blocks of our society that are holding this world together? So for me, as a bit of a hermetic sort of humanities person, so my head is like jam deep in Shakespeare and sort of like poetry or whatever, fiction book or philosophy, that sometimes I forget that the fundamental parts that runs our society are actually technological innovations. So for us, if we don't have a context of the past, it becomes really difficult to recontextualize the future. So I think this book, beyond just being a really, really great encyclopedia, full of great illustrations, by the way, and it is actually divided into some really compelling chapters. It's divided into first things, medicine, plants, animals, food, materials, tools, building. So it's divided into these broad categories, and within each one of these categories, they are going to feature great illustrations, beautifully hand-illustrated illustrations with some really great annotations to walk you through the components of the foundations of our civilization. And in fact, the paper quality is actually amazing. I don't say this a lot about books because I think a lot of books they can use a lot more improvement with regards to paper quality. But this book, every page is well considered. The paper, the weight and the texture of the paper matches perfectly with the illustration. And because it's hand illustrated, it does have that feel that you're handling Da Vinci's notebook. And you can simply leave this book on your coffee table. When your friends are over, they can probably look at this book and think to themselves, wow, this guy's really, really sophisticated and smart. So for this holiday season, if you want to wow your friends, if you want to learn more about the world, learn more about the building blocks of our civilization, and frankly, if you just want a pretty book on your coffee table, be sure to give this book a go, and you can purchase it right now from their website. Depending on which part of the world you're in, and I think they ship worldwide. And because I live in Australia, they actually delivered it to my doorstep rather quickly. So I wouldn't worry about the shipping. But nevertheless, go check out this book. Thank you, Hungry Minds, for supporting this episode. Without you guys, I wouldn't be able to do what I do for a living. And if you guys are interested in this book, make sure to check it out in the description down below. perfect gift for your friends and family and your bookish uncle. So after that, let us dive into this really exciting topic of note-taking. So let's start from the very beginning, which is with a lot of people tend to obsess over techniques. So a lot of people tend to obsess over techniques. What do we mean by this? So when we talk about note-taking, it's never the case that people are actually interested in the role of note-taking right off the bat. It's more like, what's the perfect technique for me to use? What's the perfect technique, for example, for me to extract maximum amount of information from a book? How do I take notes more efficiently? Or how do I spend less time on my notes and get more out of it? So first of all, we have this rhetoric of using note-taking simply as a tool. It is as if there's a plug-and-play formula for us to get the most out of our reading experience. So right off the bat, that's a rhetoric for efficiency. Whereas some of the times, note-taking isn't exactly about efficiency per se. And sometimes other people's techniques won't really work for you. So as a student of information and as a student of reading material, whatever you're studying, you have to make this connection in your head. Is like, maybe note-taking is more about the technique. Maybe I need to jump beyond the technique and think to myself, what is the grounding principle of this technique? Do I even have a philosophy of note-taking? Am I simply taking notes to rephrase the book for me to understand it better? Or am I simply just sort of copying the book down? Am I simply writing my own Wikipedia page about the book? This tedious note-taking process where you take down like 6 pages of notes, but you never really review it ever again. So keep that in mind. Note-taking is not about technique, but about the mindset behind it. And I'm going to share with you what I think of note-taking as. And hopefully this is going to give you some new perspectives on note-taking. So for me, one of the things that I started to notice, especially recently, is that the older that I get, so I'm approaching my mid-20s. So we started this channel when I was 17. So it's been a long time since I last talked about note-taking. I noticed that the older that I get, the shorter my notes tend to become. And the less emphasis I tend to place on technique, but I actually place a lot more emphasis nowadays on sort of viewing note-taking as stimulus material instead of transcription. So nowadays I view note-taking as stimuli or stimulus material instead of transcriptions. So transcription is the sort of awkward note-taking process where you try to fit into a perfect mold. So have you ever seen those like studygram sort of stuff where they highlight all of their notes perfectly, where they construct like a book full of pretty notes, but at the end of the day, they don't really spend much time reviewing those notes? So that's sort of the role of transcription. So you take notes so impeccably. So sometimes when lecturers on a stage lecturing about a topic, you want to transcribe every single little thing down. You want to transcribe all the figures. You want to note down all the facts. You want to note down all the years. If you're listening to a history lecture, you want to note down like when exactly this event happened here, or when exactly that sort of person died. So you have all these disparate pockets of facts. But the problem with transcription is that, number one, transcription is easily replaced by artificial intelligence. Nowadays, you can enter a prompt and AI will take notes for you faster than you can ever take any of these notes yourself. And number two, transcription doesn't really give you context. It only gives you facts without something to string the facts together. So transcription is when you listen to a really long lecture, but after you finish the lecture, you have all these facts in front of you on your note page, but you don't exactly know what to do with these facts. That's transcription. And sometimes when you enter a really complicated philosophy book, transcription is something like summarizing all of the chapters perfectly. But then again, you have to reread your own notes as if you're rereading the book for the first time. So that's the flaw of transcription. There's no context there to help you review some of the insights that you've had about the book. But whereas if you treat note-taking as constructing stimulus material, whereas if you treat note-taking simply as you noting down something that you've thought about, the text, or something that you've thought about the lecture, it is going to hit a node in your own web of understanding, it's going to hit a note within your own web of beliefs that's going to trigger a deeper understanding. It's sort of the process of translating whatever you're learning into your own language, and it takes a little while for you to discover what that language is for you. It takes a little while to find your own note-taking style, and it takes a little while for you to find out exactly what counts as stimulus material and what counts as just mere transcription. So I think one of the simple ways to make this jump is to actually start a reading journal. So whenever you finish reading a book, put all the facts aside. Put all the figures aside. So don't pursue some like higher vision of like, I'm going to take notes perfectly. And perfectionism here really is the enemy to note taking. So don't worry about transcribing things perfectly, but instead ask yourself, how did this chapter change how I view the world? How did this chapter make sense of something else that I'm sort of dealing with in my mind? How does this reading impact how I perceive information? So all these are sort of prompts to get your brain jogging to really understand what I'm saying here. This is a pretty subtle distinction. You need to take notes from a place of transcription of what you're actually thinking in your mind. You need to take notes from a place where you have these thoughts and conclusions that you've reached, but note-taking is merely a process of downloading your own thoughts onto the page, not downloading what's on a page onto another page. So this is actually the subtle distinction between learning how to think a lot more than what you write out on a page. So that's why the more books you read and the more sort of material that you come into contact with, and the more years you have to read literature, and the more years you have to deal with complex information, the more you're going to find out that actually the amount that you're going to write down are actually going to start to shorten. You won't take as many notes as you did before because your understanding is growing. So one day, maybe one remark on a note page is going to trigger a whole web of understanding in your mind. And it's going to reach a really interesting point where your notes only make sense to you and not to anyone else. Whereas I feel like if you ask a former question of like, what's the best way to take notes? It's sort of like putting the cart in front of the horse. You're asking, everyone else, what's the best way to access my notes, without realizing that your notes is for yourself. And you need to develop your own kind of style and rhetoric and philosophy of note-taking to turn your notes from mere transcriptions into stimulus material. So one day, you're able to listen to a whole chapter of an audiobook and then summarize it instantly into your own words and connect it with your own life experience. So this note page is going to be so succinct, but so personal to you. And I think that's a really good exercise, which is to read an entire chapter before you feel the urge to take any notes down, and sort of like hold back on your urge to transcribe facts, and hold back on your urge to sort of pick everything apart and then note every figure down, because that's only going to lead you to a lack of understanding, because you're going to sit there with a pile full of notes, full of facts, not with understanding. Whereas true understanding is downloading what you're thinking about onto the page, and that usually takes form in a shorter paragraph or a mere sentence that only you understand. And over time, as you practice this mindset of shifting from transcribing to sort of downloading what you're thinking onto the page, or turning what your thoughts are into stimulus material, you're going to find out that writing is actually one of the most difficult forms of practicing thinking, because writing puts your thoughts in a format that's going to really force you to reconsider all the arguments in your head, because when it's floating around in your head, when you don't write it down, in the form of notes, it's actually not going to make much sense. But the minute you start committing ideas down onto the page, after you've thought about an idea, after you've finished a chapter, you're going to realize that it's actually harder than it looks. But that's sort of the point of note-taking. It's applying structure to your thinking. It's trying to discipline your thinking. So the more you try to re-articulate what you're thinking onto the page, the more succinct your notes will become. So after describing that entire process, I want to leave you guys with a practical takeaway. So a practical exercise, which is from now on, rethink, make that mindset shift. It's about stimulus material. It's about re-articulating your own thoughts instead of trying to transcribe everything the book has to say. And after that, from now on, I want you to hold back your urge to take notes until you finish the whole chapter. So it applies to a lot of books, or it applies to an academic article. So hold back on your urge to take notes and think about it. Don't highlight, don't underline. Think about what you've read deeply, and then re-articulate what you think of it onto the page and view that as your notes. Because these notes are going to be, they're going to document something priceless, something that artificial intelligence cannot capture, which is your own thought process. And seeing that rendered onto the page, for me at least, it's a very beautiful experience. And I hope that you too will get to experience this. So walk away from this video, practice this technique of reading the whole chapter first, let yourself think, and then re-articulating what you're thinking about into your note-taking system, or into a notebook, into a Notion page, whatever you want. But it's about the re-articulation, the act of re-articulation instead of transcription. And that's going to put you on the right track to develop your own note-taking strategies. And that is the mindset shift that I want to talk about in this video. Anyway, another video today. Thank you so much for watching. And I want to wish you happy reading, happy holidays or upcoming holidays. And I hope you're having a wonderful day, night, whatever time it is in your time zone. And this is Robin Walden. Leave me your comments down below, and I want to wish you a happy day. So I'll see you in the next video. Take care, and goodbye.